Aflatoxin is caused by a fungus named Aspergillus flavus that is found in the field naturally. It's there everywhere. It's there in the soil, it's there in the crop, it's there in dead insects, dead organic matter, it's there in the air, it's everywhere. So that is the fungus that actually causes aflatoxin. And within this fungus, there are some strains that produce a large amount of toxins. And those are the strains that causes most of the problem. Like in Kenya, there is a very toxic strain that is normally found in Eastern Province, which is called the S strain. And that is a strain that produces the largest amount of toxin that is ever known to mankind.
Aflatoxin is a very important metabolite or byproduct of a fungus because of the fact that it exists everywhere, because of the fact that it cannot get destroyed by the various ways of processing our food. We all have food that we must eat, and unfortunately also aflatoxin is able to pass through membranes, skin membranes or tissue membranes, so that a mother who has consumed food that has aflatoxin gets a fetus, an unborn baby, getting affected by the aflatoxin. So aflatoxin exposure begins even in the intrauterine life when the baby is developing. It exists in breast milk, and also it exists in the weaning foods that children get. Why children? Children, we talk about children from before they are born until they are probably 15, 18. They are developing. Their systems are developing. It means that children have critical stages of development or windows of development where they are vulnerable. What is important for public health is a chronic low-dose exposure to aflatoxin. That means you have little quantity every day in the various types of food you eat, which is contaminated. The bulk of our food is grown, stored, and consumed at the same point. And this is very different from Western Europe and Western world, where there's centralized methods of getting food, storing it, testing it, and so forth. So a lot of our food is not tested because it's consumed where it's grown. So we have levels that are sometimes very high. They may have acute gastroenteritis, diarrhea and vomiting, other chronic effects like liver damage, which may ultimately become liver cancer, particularly when there is a high incidence of hepatitis B. Hepatitis B is an infection that affects the liver, and with that, cirrhosis and possibly cancer. Of course, cancer is the most well-known effect of aflatoxin, but I dare say that the elephant in the room is a blunting of the immune system, particularly for the pediatric population. So no more common illnesses are exaggerated in these children because of the elephant in the room, chronic low-dose exposure to aflatoxin.
Aflatoxin affects the health of our population because once you consume it and it keeps building in your body system, it can lead to a number of health challenges, from the problems of liver and other dysfunctions in the body, and also it leads to stunting of young children, and stunting reduces the physical, mental and psychological development of children, and this is not good enough. Apart from the fact that it kills people, has a negative consequence on agriculture, on food security. Because if you have your grains of maize, rice or any other commodity, or even animal feed, it would lower the production and productivity of those crops. Member states also suffer when their crops are infested with aflatoxin, because before you can export any agricultural commodity, it has to be aflatoxin free. There are various standards established by the Codex Alimentarius Commission on the levels of aflatoxin. Different governments in Europe and the United States have also standards. So if you don't meet those standards at the point of export, if you export those commodities or crops that are infected with aflatoxin, they will be rejected. And that's a serious economic and financial loss on the part of the farmer, on the part of the exporter, and also on the part of our member states, because those goods will not be accepted in international trade, and you cannot generate foreign exchange for your country, which is very important for socio-economic development. So aflatoxin should be seen from a developmental perspective. It affects food security, it affects human health, it also affects trade, whether international, regional, or even national trade. It results in the loss of millions of dollars of income for West Africa and even the continent.
We have felt the impact of aflatoxin on this continent, mainly as a result of the economic impact on the businesses that produce the commodities that are prone to aflatoxin contamination. As you're very aware, the potential for agriculture in Africa is very wide. We have a lot of land, we have a lot of water, we produce a lot of commodities. And we have seen throughout the continent a number of countries, their exports to many international markets have gone from being very high to almost zero. We have been eliminated from many markets in the world. People are suffering. People have lost employment because we can no longer sell. Our commodities are not competitive.
Aflatoxin control is important for Africa because it is a hidden danger. It's not something that you easily see with your eyes, and yet the effects come much later. And it is as a result of contamination in many of our foods, most especially prevalent in maize and groundnuts. And so the concern is always to ensure that it is controlled, to ensure that people are eating food that is not contaminated, so that they don't get sick later. And so the African Union, partnering with others through the Partnership for Aflatoxin Control, is working very hard to ensure that we put in measures within the African member states to control aflatoxin.
The ECOWAS Commission is the regional economic bloc for West Africa, and it implements the Comprehensive African Agricultural Development Program, CADEP. And the CADEP has been domesticated in West Africa. We have what we call the ECOWAS Agricultural Policy, called ECOWAP. And from the ECOWAP, we have developed both regional and national agricultural investment plans for food and nutrition security. So we have plans at two levels, at the regional and at the national level. Now, as part of our mandate, as part of the ECOWAS agricultural policy and the various plans, the issue of food safety, food quality ranks very, very high. And it is in that vein that the ECOWAS Commission is intervening in the fight against aflatoxin. As a result, the ECOWAS Commission, as part of its agricultural policy, has put in place a mechanism to control the spread of aflatoxin in West Africa. And it is from that perspective that we have been partnering with a number of institutions, both at the regional, at the continental, and even at the level of the member states, to work together to control the menace of aflatoxin in West Africa.
There are solutions at the pre-harvest stage and there are solutions at the post-harvest stages. Most of the solutions are at the post-harvest stages. These solutions are something like timely harvest, good drying, good storage, good transportation practices. There are food processing methods by which you can actually manage. In the pre-harvest stage, there are not many. There are actually very few solutions that farmers can think of using. And most of them are either uneconomical or they are very difficult to follow. The only solution that we have found commercially available is the biological control. And this is something that we have been promoting. But when we say that use the biological control, we also mention that use the other practices too. Although biological control can cut down the toxin levels dramatically in the field, we need to protect the grain in the store as well. In the store, if you have biological control or what we call as the Aflasafe product, the pre-harvest treatment will have post-harvest solution, but you actually need to maintain good grain integrity.
From my experience working on aflatoxin issues for the last 25 years, I can tell you that Aflasafe is the most effective technology we have to deal with the aflatoxin challenge developed by the International Institute for Tropical Agriculture, IIT. And evidence also shows that it is a cost-effective and efficient technology. So, as I said, it has to be integrated with other approaches. But Aflasafe is working and it's also getting acceptance. It's being adopted by farmers in different countries throughout Africa. So I think it's a very promising solution to deal with the problem. One of the major solutions we have.
EAGC is a membership organization for grain stakeholders in the Eastern Africa region. Membership is open to grain farmers, grain traders, grain millers, and other associated and affiliated organizations that have an interest in the grain, either supplying inputs or solutions like finance or logistics or such kind of solutions. From this first Africa Post-Harvest Loss Reductions Congress and also the symposium hosted by the IITA, I have found it extremely informative. We have learned a lot about effects of, particularly effects of aflatoxin, its causes, and also, more importantly, some of the solutions available, particularly the Aflasafe biocontrol solution, which is available. And from the presentations that were shared, it is indeed proving that it is a technology that is working and that should be scaled up. And so it was quite interesting to learn all this from this symposium, and it gives us a lot of hope that there is going to be a solution to aflatoxin. This
Aflasafe is a product that has been developed and tested in West Africa. Testing has taken place in Nigeria, in Gambia, in Senegal, in Burkina Faso, and I think in Ghana. So the beauty with the technology is that they are using local strains of the fungus, to control aflatoxin. So the technology has been field tested over a period of time. They have looked at the risk associated with it. They have looked at the ethical issues, and they have also looked at environmental issues. Is it going to affect our environment? Is it going to affect our soils? Is it going to affect human beings? During all these trials of Aflasafe, whether in Ibadan, at the level of the laboratories, the field trials, and when these trials were extended to some of our member states, ECOWAS has been part and parcel of the process. And there is empirical evidence in all these countries and in other parts of Africa where Aflasafe research has taken place that it is a safe technology. It is a good technology, and it's very, very effective. And also, the Aflasafe technology is very, very farmer friendly and can be used by farmers in our countries without any serious hazard once you stick to the recommended dosage for your fields. So Aflasafe is a very good product. Aflasafe has contributed effectively towards the reduction of aflatoxin in the region. It has moved from research and innovation. Now it's been an accepted commodity and now it's commercialized. That's why you have the Aflasafe Technology Transfer Initiative, ATTC, which is also in existence to help promote Aflasafe at the commercial level, so that many more farmers can have access to Aflasafe at an affordable cost in a timely manner when they need it, and also to be able to apply it on their crops and on their fields and get maximum benefit. Because the important thing is that if you use the technology well in your fields, it can drastically reduce aflatoxin levels, and you will be able to have aflatoxin-free commodities which you can package, which you can market and get a very good price for your products. So it's Aflasafe in West Africa, and I can say with all degree of certainty is a big contribution to the advancement of food security in West Africa and the African region.
We've a lot of experience because we started doing research in Hor and Bura, which is one of our main irrigation farms, where we had challenges with aflatoxin. And after doing research, we got REFOS going down by 90%. From that experience, we moved forward to another bigger farm, targeting 1 million acres for the government, and started applying Aflasafe from the beginning of cropping. And from there, we've been getting levels of aflatoxin less than the permitted 10 parts per billion of Kenya and below the European REFOS or standard levels of 4 parts per billion. So far, the crop we are getting from that farm, out of those experiences, is free of aflatoxin, even after it has stayed long in the store. The benefits of Aflasafe are enormous, considering that when we had challenges of aflatoxin before we got the solution of using Aflasafe, farmers lost crop, which was taken away for destruction because it contained aflatoxin. And that meant a lot of loss of money for the farmer, and also discouraged the farmer from continuing with cropping. And the farmer would have rather stayed without cropping than grow and produce a product that's going to be destroyed and of no return to her or to the farmer. It being working and as it's doing in Ghana today, it remains a lot to us as far as expansion of irrigation is concerned, and also improvement of food security.
As far as we are concerned at the present time, in terms of all the efforts, and we want to say there have been a lot of efforts, all kinds of efforts in terms of trying to control aflatoxin contamination. Some are procedural measures, agricultural practices, and so on. But we are seeing that it is only Aflasafe that seems to have large-scale impact that will be recognizable in terms of us having taken a major step to deal with the aflatoxin challenge on the African continent. So we are very hopeful.
Drying technologies available to smallholder farmers are actually relatively limited. You've got the big dryers that cost hundreds of thousands of dollars, mainly in central locations. But most farmers either dry on the ground or dry on a tarpaulin. Recently, we've got a number of new, smaller dryers coming into the market around solar technology, solar bubble technology, but they have a challenge that if it's overcast and raining, quite often they don't perform particularly well. And we've got some new mechanical dryers coming into the market like Easy Dry and some other slightly larger options, but they are very limited at the moment in terms of scaling the technology out and being aware, farmers and business people being aware that they're available. There are a number of technologies now available for grain storage directed towards smallholder farmers. They are almost entirely centered around hermetic storage, i.e. airtight storage, bags that keep from transferring air in and out so the insects die inside them. The great advantage of hermetic storage is it also arrests aflatoxin developing. There's a whole range. You have the normal bag sizes, your 50 kgs, your 90 kgs, your 100 kgs, but you've also got plastic silos and metal silos ranging up to different prices. The one aspect I would say that's important is that bags at around about $2 to $2.50 are easily affordable for smallholder farmers, even to try one to see how it works. Whereas these bigger bulk devices require a higher level of investment.
There's a very important role that markets have to play in aflatoxin control in Africa. Farmers need motivation to invest in aflatoxin control technologies. And that motivation could be their own family's health, but when they are supplying the market, they need a different kind of motivation. Even if the inputs for aflatoxin control are available free of charge, they need to go to the effort to apply those inputs. They need to put that maize in special bags. They need to put Aflasafe on their farm land. And so price incentives can play that part. They can act as an incentive for farmers to go the extra mile to ensure that their food is safe when it's heading to the market.
The main challenges related to our work are mainly, first of all, the problem is complex. It affects the entire value chain, starting the production stage, during harvesting, and post-harvest storage. So it's complex. It's very difficult to target interventions. So that makes it difficult for farmers or countries to deal with it easily. It's very knowledge intensive. The other thing is, still we know enough to say aflatoxin is a problem in Africa, but evidence is lacking. We don't have enough knowledge about the problem and even about the solutions. With the exception of Aflasafe, we still do need a lot of work, to generate enough evidence and solutions. In addition, I could add also the lack of awareness among the public, and even to some extent, policymakers is also undermining, effective aflatoxin work in Africa.
Now, there are many challenges associated with making markets work for food safety in Kenya especially, and throughout Africa. The first of these is that smallholder farmers supply the majority of the food supply. So aggregating the food of those smallholder farmers is essential before testing can take place. Testing simply isn't going to be economically feasible when you're buying 5 bags of maize from a smallholder farmer. Another challenge is that currently there's no premium per se for safe food. So we need to work with these farmers also to reach the quality standards that the high-value millers require in order to purchase the maize. And then, of course, there's the problem that the market is imperfectly regulated. So the farmer might sell to the high-end miller, but if the high-end miller finds that that maize is contaminated with aflatoxin, the maize is not going to be thrown away. The maize is simply going to go down the chain to the next miller along the line that may or may not be testing. And then if that miller also rejects, it's going to end up in the informal market.
So the role of PACA, the Partnership for Aflatoxin Control in Africa, is to mobilize African countries. We have 6 pilot countries across the continent to learn lessons that can then be used by the countries where we are piloting, but also be replicated in those countries on the continent where we have not yet expanded to. So we do research to generate knowledge, and that will inform also technologies that can be used by our member states to control aflatoxin.
PACA's work at country level is driven by the countries themselves. So governments are actually owning the national plans. So we develop national plans with the national stakeholders, And these national plans, by the way, in many countries in Africa where we work, are part of their national strategies, their Candid investment plans. So there is a huge buy-in, unbelievable buy-in, ownership at country level. At regional level, a good example is the ECOWAS Commission in West Africa that has developed a regional Aflatoxin Control plan, and that has also endorsed this national plan by its policymakers. So ECOWAS now has a regional policy, a regional strategy to deal with aflatoxins.
In terms of addressing the challenges of aflatoxin, ECOWAS is implementing the program developed by the Partnership for Aflatoxin Control in Africa, PACA, but we are not limited to that. We have also, as a commission, signed a memorandum of understanding with the International Institute for Tropical Agriculture, IITA, based in Ibadan, Nigeria, to address a whole range of agricultural issues. And one of those issues is the issue of food quality. And to be more specific, is the issue of controlling aflatoxin with available technologies in the region. So this is one. In addition to that, apart from the memorandum of understanding that we have with IITA, we also, as a commission, do a lot of advocacy, with our governments, with the leaders of our countries, with decision makers and policy makers, to constantly remind them that aflatoxin is a reality, and the consequences of aflatoxin on the West African population are very grave.
IFPRI, as a research institution, has the role of doing research to shed light on what are the most effective levers of encouraging farmers to adopt aflatoxin control technologies and everybody along the value chain. So we have taken on several research projects that work with farmers to look at the impact of price incentives on their adoption of these technologies. Then we're also working with millers to improve their capacity for testing and looking at the impact that safe maize branding has on consumer response. And then finally, we're trying to link those two ends of the value chain together so that the farmers can sell directly to the millers and capture that premium price. If we can show that this works in a research study, then it can be scaled up and hopefully benefit millions of farmers and many more millions of consumers.
The private sector is in the front line. Our role is to do business. We have to do business to ensure that we are growing our economies on this continent. To be competitive, we must meet the standards that are required in the markets. The markets can even be our own domestic markets, regional markets within the continent, but most importantly, international markets. So as long as we are not meeting these standards, we are not competitive. We cannot be in the business. Our economies will not be competitive. The private sector is not going to be competitive. The economies will not grow. So the private sector is at the forefront and has a major role to play.
We believe that we have to bring on board an array of stakeholders, public officials, private sector, civil society, because ultimately for governments to take action, you need to have laws and regulations. So PACA is working towards putting together that knowledge, assembling it, and then advancing in our communication and advocacy work so that that information goes out, reaches members of parliament, reaches ministers, permanent secretaries, so that we have a constituency of people that understand the importance of controlling aflatoxin for public health in Africa. And it is through that information that then you can have laws and regulations put in place.
So through our work in PACA focus countries, right now we have 6 of them, we saw that there is a huge gap in aflatoxin testing capacity. Aflatoxin is invisible. If you can't test it, you can't manage it. So one of the things that we have done is to build testing capacity. We have identified partner labs in our focus countries, and we have equipped them with aflatoxin testing equipment, we provided also training to their personnel. And so I think we have now labs in at least PACA focus countries that are regularly testing for aflatoxins that are working very well. In addition, PACA also trains policymakers, and we involve them in our convenings, in our workshops and meetings. In addition, also we have deliberate efforts to train policymakers. In addition to policymakers, there is also, we see also a need to train extension agents. So building the extension capacity in our countries.
One of the ways we are working is to improve knowledge, make sure that there's knowledge available, credible, objective knowledge on aflatoxin situation. And the other way that we are hoping to bring about change in controlling aflatoxin in Africa is to devolve the activities from whatever we are doing at the African Union into the individual countries. We're going to make sure that there's policy and regulations, those are in place in the different countries. We're going to make sure that extension, health and agriculture extension workers are trained and are made aware. We're going to make sure there's policy and advocacy in the different countries and many other issues that are relevant to the different countries. We're calling this the National Aflatoxin Control Action Plan in the 6 pilot countries. The other way we intend to make changes and bring about systemic change in Africa is to make sure that our activities are scalable and replicable. We have 6 pilot countries, but we're going to make sure that whatever we are doing can be replicated and scaled to other 9 pilot countries. The 4th way we are going to implement systemic change is to make sure that there's financial sustainability at the country level and at the regional level. We're going to make sure that the private sector is involved, the governments are involved and are taking ownership and buying into what we're doing. The research agricultural institutes, both national and international, are working with us to work on mitigation strategies, to collect information, and to do very thorough monitoring and evaluation. At the end of this, we hope that every year we can produce a status of aflatoxin control in Africa on a yearly basis.
In agriculture, we're more concerned about production. People who are in technology want to sell technology. For me, it's really the total effect on the patient. I want, number one, more health practitioners to know about aflatoxin. I've talked in many meetings in the world, and a lot of our colleagues are not aware about the seriousness of the problem. That's the first step. Create awareness amongst health practitioners. Why? Health practitioners act as what we call sentinel surveillance. They're the first ones to see a little bit of jaundice, a bit more of it being seen more often, and then they say, is there something going on here? This may not just be hepatitis A or hepatitis B infection, maybe something else. So awareness in training and awareness for those that are working. Secondly, once you create awareness, there must be ways of testing. If a doctor has no way of testing for aflatoxin, then he's disempowered. He can't even begin to think about it. So simple ways of having testing, for what we call point-of-care testing, okay, where you can do urine and you can actually detect aflatoxin level in urine. Unfortunately, this only assesses exposure in the last 24 hours. There are serum-based bioassay tests that exist in research laboratories, very few in the world. These tests, serum-based tests, are important. They should be made available in regional labs and hopefully ultimately in the larger hospitals, so that any suspicion of aflatoxin, one is able to actually measure it and ascertain that the diagnosis is related to aflatoxin exposure.
What I would like to see is to see the aflatoxin problem treated like any other food safety problem. But because there's been a lot of emphasis on the adverse health effects and the way it's cross-cutting health, agriculture and trade, there's a little bit of confusion. And when that confusion reigns, it becomes difficult to deal with it at national level. It's even one of those complicated issues because it's transboundary. and it affects a lot of the staple foods that we view as food security crops. So when you view it as a food safety problem, then you know where to focus. You know that within the countries, what I need to focus on is to strengthen controls within a national food control system. So you strengthen controls on the affected value chains, beginning downstream and moving upstream, and looking at the several value chain actors, both horizontally and vertically, and giving them the appropriate skills. As COMESA, we already have programs running on aflatoxin control, but we always focus on things that we know that other actors are not involved in and which have got a very strong regional dimension. So one of the things we are focusing on is to ensure that governments have the right information in a timely manner, information that's evidence-based, that's scientific, that can help them to make well-informed decisions when it comes to aflatoxin control, be it in regulations or mitigation technologies.
The way forward as a result of these positive results is to upscale this technology that is replicated in other areas where we have irrigation where it has not been used. We have also decided as an institution to apply Aflasafe on every crop that is cropped in our soils so that we move towards zero tolerance of aflatoxin in our soils. We also want to heighten capacity building and also advocacy. At the same time, sensitizing our stakeholders so that together we move forward and ensure that we get out of these menace out of our production systems. We will be also using irrigation systems to improve livestock farming by production of fodder crops, and hence we are also going to contribute positively towards reduction of the same in livestock products. For us to be able to achieve this, we need a lot of partnership since we require finances. Hence, it's also going to be one of our focus on building partnerships.
Countries that have serious aflatoxin problems have to invest a lot of money in treating affected citizens. So the damage in terms of food security, in terms of the health care delivery system, in terms of trade is enormous. And this is in the millions. And studies have been conducted by PACA, by IITA, and also some independent consultants have also done studies on the impact. And the impact is not something that one can be happy about. So that's why you have all these collective initiatives by IITA on the one side with the technology, by the Medical Research Council of the Gambia on the health aspect when it comes to hepatitis issues, and other institutions like the World Trade Organizations, the African Union, ECOWAS, are all putting our heads together to make sure that we lower the rates of aflatoxin control. And we have talked a lot about the technology. I want to also indicate that the ECOWAS Commission, with the support of the Partnership for Aflatoxin Control in Africa and the African Union, PACA, we have developed for West Africa an ECOWAS aflatoxin action plan. This aflatoxin action plan for the West African region is a holistic plan in which we are looking at all aspects of the problems of aflatoxin, from the agricultural and food security perspective, from the health and human development perspective, from the trade and economic perspective. So we have got this plan. It has been developed, it has been validated and even approved by the authorities of ECOWAS, the political authorities, our ministers, our heads of state. And we have started the process of operationalizing the plan with the support of PACA and other development partners.
If you look at the nature of African agriculture, it is smallholder based. We have a lot of smallholder farmers who themselves are working with the small traders, with the small processors, and so on. So the contamination is also along the value chain, and there are a lot of players, okay? So it is very important that we touch as many smallholders as possible for us to have realistic impact in terms of aflatoxin control using Aflasafe at the very beginning of the value chain. We have to use it massively. We are looking at Aflasafe as holding a lot of promise to help the SMEs and many other stakeholders within the value chains of those commodities that are prone to aflatoxin contamination.
I see the need for partnerships, very meaningful and effective partnerships. Because beyond all this, you really need very strong regulatory frameworks, very strong policy frameworks that can back what you're doing. What I wouldn't like to see, and what I'm getting from this Congress, is I see research trying to substitute extension services in our countries. Well, when you go to the United States of America, in their academic institutions, you always find people who are doing partly academics, partly research, and part of their time goes into the government extension programs. We don't have that kind of model in our countries. Our extension systems too are engaged. Our governments need to step up a little bit, but we also need to know that as we engage governments with our research, let's also encourage them to have extension programs that will work in their context. Bringing our experiences is good, but leveraging what works in our countries is extremely important. So I want to see partnerships that have clearly defined roles so that as people engage, they are leveraging each other's strength, each other's mandates to provide solutions that are effective and sustainable.
We need to do what we can to raise awareness among the public, all the way from the farmers out in the affected areas where there is a high prevalence of aflatoxin, to understand that it is an issue, it is a menace, so that raising more awareness, I think, is something that needs to be done. So resources and efforts around raising more awareness, I think, is important. Secondly, I would call on the private sector, whom I represent at EAGC, that it is important that as private sector, they act ethically and that they commit to providing safe foods to their clients. And so it is important that they do perform some kind of self-regulation by ensuring that, one, they are testing each and every grain that is coming into their facilities. And if they find grain that has aflatoxin levels that are beyond the accepted standards of 10 parts per billion, that they should do the right thing and not take in such grain into the processing line, so that we can avoid situations where you pick a product, package of maize flour or rice or other grain cereals or groundnuts from a supermarket shelf, and you test and you realize that it has levels of aflatoxin that are much higher than what is the accepted standard. So those two key messages, that private sector do take on responsibility and play their role and act ethically to ensure that they provide safe food to their clients, and that among the public, it's important that awareness and knowledge about the menace of aflatoxin, which many times is not visible to the naked eye, that they can understand and they can be aware so that they can take the correct decisions.
What I would like to say is that it is very, very important to ensure that the stakeholders that have been involved so far in the research of being able to produce Aflasafe in particular now make a genuine effort to reach out to all policymakers in the African continent with regard to hastening the use of this product. It is the policymakers that are going to make sure that our institutions move at a reasonable speed, that will support our farmers, that will support our traders, that will support our processors to be able to put it back into the marketplace products of quality.
Our advice would be for these governments and for our member states in the ECOWAS region to treat aflatoxin as a serious developmental issue. It transcends agriculture. It's also a health challenge. It's also a trade challenge, you know. So it's for us at the level of the ECOWAS Commission, we see aflatoxin infestation in the region as a developmental challenge. So our governments, our member states, public, private sector, civil society organizations should all come together to join hands to address the challenges of aflatoxin. And this calls for investments. Governments must put in money, you know, just as we have been putting in money in other emergencies that arise in the region from time to time. Governments must invest in reducing the negative consequence, the effects of aflatoxin on livelihood systems, on our populations, and on our economy. So it calls for investment. That is very, very critical.
If we are serious about agricultural transformation in Africa and breaking the cycle of poverty in Africa, we have to deal with this problem head on. And we should give aflatoxin control the attention it deserves. And also we should give technologies like Aflasafe enough investment and focus so that we could see more adoption and wider use scaling up in the continent. So overall, I think given the attention that it is getting from our policymakers, I believe Africa will have a good handle on this challenge.